In the last episode of History Traveler, we started talking about the Battle of Arras, which was a battle in the First World War that kicked off in April of 1917 to basically push to and through the German Hindenburg Line in support of a French offensive that was taking place elsewhere on the Western Front. Well, on the far left flank of the Allied advance was a high ridge that ran from northwest to southeast. It was about 7 kilometers long and dominated all of the area around it and had to be taken in order to guarantee the success of the Battle of Arras. Its nickname is the Shield of Arras, but most people know it better as Vimy Ridge. Well, this is Vimy Ridge, and I am so excited to be here. This is a place that I have wanted to visit for a long time now. Vimy Ridge is really a site that's kind of a place of pilgrimage for a lot of Canadians. This is the site where the Canadians had one of their greatest battles of the First World War. And even though a lot of people associate Vimy Ridge as, with the Canadians, there was a lot of other fighting that took place right here. Let's talk for a moment about why this place was so important to both the Allies and the Central Powers. We are looking approximately to the north right now, and the western slope of Vimy Ridge is kind of a gradual rise, and then it peaks right here where we see the memorial ahead of us, and then off to the east is the Douai Plain, and it really drops off. So anybody who takes this ridge dominates this low ground to the east. So anyone who takes or holds Vimy Ridge is not just holding the ridge. You're also holding all of this area down here, because this is indefensible. Artillery would just completely devastate anyone in that valley. Now, in October of 1914, the Germans took this area right here. In December, there was an effort by the French to retake it. It failed. In the summer of 1915, they tried again and suffered 100,000 losses trying to take this spot right here, and again failed. They tried again in September of 1915 and again failed with a loss of 40,000 men. So there was a Canadian soldier who, when the Canadians took over this sector, said that this whole western slope here looked like a vast graveyard. Now, in World War I, the Canadians really saw their baptism of fire in the Second Battle of Ypres, which is where we see poison gas introduced for the first time. They also fought hard in the Battle of the Somme. They kind of became known as the Allies' shock troops. But it was here at Vimy Ridge where all 4 divisions of the Canadian Corps were going to be fighting together side by side. And there's actually a pretty good map here on the side of this bathroom that helps us to orient where we are. All right, we're going to use this bronze map to kind of get an idea of where we are at on the battlefield. So first off, looking at on a broad scale, This is the front line in April of 1917. So here you have Arras, and then just to the north is Vimy Ridge, and then off to the east there, like I was talking about earlier, is the Douai Plain. So if you take Vimy Ridge, well, you basically have control of this whole area here. And this is going to be the left flank of the offensive. Now, if we zoom in and take a look at the front lines around Vimy Ridge, when the Canadians get here, you're going to have the 4th Canadian Division on the left. They're going to be attacking up through here. The area that we are standing in right now, where the memorial is where the 4th Infantry Division attacked. You're going to have the 3rd Infantry Division to their right. You're going to have the 2nd to the right of the 3rd. And then on the right flank of the Canadian Corps is the 1st Canadian Division. For the Germans, you got the 79th Reserve Division, the 1st Bavarian Reserve Corps, and the 1st Bavarian Reserve Division. And then on the right flank of the Canadians is going to be the 51st Highland Division. So anyway, that's just a general look of where we are on Vimy Ridge. Now, we're going to come back up here to the battlefield and to this memorial a little bit later. But for now, we're going to take the advice of my buddy Paul Reed, who runs the Old Frontline podcast, outstanding podcast about the First World War. And we're going to go to some of the rear areas where the Canadians kind of staged up and work our way back up here to the battlefield. I've moved just a few miles to the kind of southwest of Vimy Ridge to a place called Mont St. Eloi. And this was kind of the rear area for the Canadians. There's a big misconception in World War I that soldiers got in on the front trenches and they just stayed in the front line until they were either killed or wounded. Well, not really. They were cycled in and out. You might go in and serve on the front line for 5 days and then come back to a reserve area for 5 days and then come back to an area like this right here. What we are looking at are the ruins of the Abbey of Mont St. Eloi. And again, there were thousands of Canadians who were billeted here in the rear area before they would be sent in to the fight. The 51st Highland Division was also here at this place, but them and the Canadians kind of got into a little bit of a brawl, and the 51st Highland Division got moved elsewhere. But this is a church that dates back to the 17th century. It was damaged pretty bad in the French Revolution. And then in 1915, the Germans thought that the French were using these two towers as artillery observation posts. So they again shelled it and did further damage. Man, churches in World War I and World War II just really took a beating for that very reason. People always thought that they were being used as artillery spotting positions, which they were. So such a shame that this thing was ruined. And there's also another story. There was an airfield that was close by here that was established in May of 1917, and there's a story of a pilot. His name escapes me right here at the moment, but there's a story that he flew his plane in between these ruined spires. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know, but it's pretty good. It's a pretty cool story anyway. I know that this is a video about Vimy Ridge and World War I, but there's one quick story that I want to throw in here just because I find it interesting. This area would see war again in 1940 when the Germans invaded. And there was a really unfortunate incident that occurred right down here in the area of that farm in the distance, where there were two British anti-tank gunners who saw a couple of tanks, thought that they were German, and then fired upon them. The tanks were actually French tanks, and of course they fired back, and you had what's known as a blue-on-blue incident, where both sides thought they were firing on the enemy, and instead they were firing on each other. Well, here are the graves of the men who were killed in that blue-on-blue incident. Unfortunately, you can see all this happened on the 22nd of May, and this one remains unknown. Okay, we moved down into the valley where that blue-on-blue incident took place in May of 1940. That took place near a place called the Berthenval Farm. As a matter of fact, you can see it through this opening here behind me in the trees. And this farm also served as the Advanced Corps headquarters for Julian Byng on April 9th of 1917 when the Battle of Vimy Ridge kicks off. Julian Byng was the Corps commander of the Canadian Corps, and his men loved him. His nickname was Bungo. They called themselves Bungo's boys. And he was a strict guy. He was a disciplinarian, put his men through tough training, but that tough training was really going to pay off at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. Now, once the men came out of this rear area, well, they would move to a little bit closer to the front lines. And then here in the chalk downlands, there were just tunnels all over the place. And there were, I think, 13 tunnels that led up to the front line, where prior to the battle on April 9th, so April 8th, which was an Easter Sunday, these Canadians started going into these tunnels and making their way up to the front line. All right, I've made my way back up to the front line, and if you look way the heck off in the distance there on the horizon, that's where we just were on the rear, or in the rear area for the Canadian Corps. Now, when the Canadians made their way up here to the front, they didn't really go over open ground because that's a good way to get cut to ribbons by German artillery. But as I mentioned, there were a lot of underground tunnels, or they called them subways, that brought troops up to this position. So anyway, we've made our way to the Vimy Ridge Visitor Center, which is where the 3rd Infantry Division was going to kick off their attack on April 9th. Here at the Visitor Center, they have some things in place that really do a good job of helping us to visualize what the front line looked like in 1917 and to learn a little bit more about trench warfare. Now, you look at this right here and it may seem like this is something that was just ground churned up by artillery fire. These are actually the frontline trenches that we are looking at right here. So they go in a zigzag fashion so that if an artillery shell does hit, it minimizes the damage so that the blast, when it goes laterally, doesn't injure more people than what is necessary. And then if we look over here, well, this is a communication trench, and I'll show you in just a moment where that is going to. But for now, we're going to take a little dive down into the remains of the Grange Tunnel, or the Grange subway. Now, I do need to mention that I can't just go in this thing, and I'm having to go with the group, so bear with me. I'm going to get as much as I can as we explore this tunnel system. All right, we just got down into the tunnels here, and man, this is really something else. We're about 8 meters below the surface right now, and you notice the walls are kind of white. Well, this is all like chalk downland, so it's real soft, easy to tunnel through. I'm getting caught up with my group right here, but yeah, this is really, really neat. So you can imagine being a soldier down here waiting to go into the fight, and you're a little bit bored. Well, maybe you pull out your bayonet and leave your mark. Here you can see where somebody with the initials LC carved his name into the wall here. All right, we just popped out of the Grange Tunnel here. And that was pretty interesting. I apologize that I wasn't able to show more than I did. Again, I was with a group, so I had to kind of move a little faster than what I normally do. But anyway, we've now moved out into the observation trenches. So again, we had the frontline trenches there at first, and then there was a communication trench that would have ran up here. You also had the tunnel that ran up here. Well, on April 9th, it was snowing, it was cold, kind of nasty weather. Well, you would have had hundreds of guys piling out of this tunnel and making their way into this trench right here. All right, so again, here's the tunnel that we just popped out of. And before we start going through these observation trenches, there are a few things that I want to point out. First are these concrete sandbags here. Now, obviously, during World War I, they wouldn't have had these nice, concrete sandbag walls. This is something that was created in the post-war years in order to preserve these trenches and keep them from collapsing in, but still kind of give you an idea of what it looked like. And then what we're looking at here is a representation of what are called duck boards. So originally, duck boards were made of wood. This one is made of concrete. These trenches got really nasty. This would have been just a muddy mess during the war, and this kept soldiers' feet dry and kept them, from sinking down into the mud. All right, now we're going to go ahead and move through these observation trenches. One other thing that I want to point out, I've heard stories that the veterans who returned to these trenches right here, in some cases didn't care for it much because they thought that this was a poor representation of what they experienced, that it was a little bit too sanitized. But I get it, you don't want to have visitors, having to slog through the mud and everything like that. So anyway, while this, of course, looks a little bit too clean for World War I, it does give us a good representation of what these trenches looked like. All right, we're continuing to move through these observation trenches here, and we're going to go up this one now. So it kind of kicks off to the left here. And this is what was called an outpost line. And these outpost lines would jut into no man's land. So this was as close to the front as you could possibly get. So as we move up to the front through this outpost line, you see here, again, this is as close to the front or to no man's land as you can get without actually getting into it. This little spot here where you can step up is called a fire step. Allows you to get your head over the parapet there. And let's go ahead and just walk up here and get up here and take a quick look. So this steel plate is called a loophole. And as you can see, it's got a little mechanism there where you can open and close it, and this was to try and protect forward observers from being hit by a sniper. And in a minute, when you see how close we are to the German front line, you will understand why you would want to be behind this steel plate. So guys who would get up here sometimes would cover themselves in like a cloth to darken themselves so that when this hole opened, it wouldn't, backlight them or anything like that. And you got another one right here. And yeah, this was a very, very dangerous position. You would not want to poke your head up for very long in this spot. All right, continuing our way through the trenches here. Now just imagine that you were one of these guys in the 3rd Canadian Division and you were making your way up to the front line here, and you get up on this fire step and then you hear a whistle blow. Again, April the 9th, it's going to be cold and snowy, and now you're going to do what is called going over the top and charging into the enemy lines. So we're not going to go over the top right there. We're going to take a little bit easier path. Okay, so we're coming out of the trenches now, and this is absolutely crazy. Okay, so let's just walk over here. Here is the Canadian front line. So you got these 3rd Infantry guys who are coming out, and they're going around these craters, and they're charging the German front line, which is right here. So again, Canadian front line, German front line. This is how close these two armies were to each other. Let's take a quick second to talk about this big hole in the ground that we are looking at. Now, in addition to the war that is happening above ground, there was also a war that was happening below the surface as well. Both sides were executing these tunneling operations to try and get underneath the lines. And there was a fight that was going on down here as well. Well, this is one of the mine craters that was blown up along this part of the line. So you had some soldiers with these tunneling companies who would try and tunnel under, and what they were trying to do, I might explain this a little bit more in another video, but they would try and set charges beneath the opposing forces' lines and blow them up. And then you had other tunneling companies that were trying to dig under the enemy's tunnel and blow up their tunnels. Well, this is one of the craters that resulted. And if you look, well, there's our loophole where we were just a minute ago, right on the edge of the crater. And then you also have the German line over here on the edge of the crater. Well, this mine wasn't blown up right in between the two. It was more likely blown up, and then both sides kind of dug trenches up to it. Now, we already saw an observation post on the Canadian side. If we come over here, you all know how I love to show derelict concrete. Here is a German observation post. You can see it's got a little bit more of a permanent look to it. So this is where the Germans would have been set up. You'll notice that the loophole doesn't point towards the opposing side. That would be a good way to get shot. Rather, it's pointed laterally to where they could observe no man's land and see if anybody was trying to cross out here. Yeah, that is very interesting. All right, let's take a dive down into the German trenches, just real quick. Okay, now as we get down into the German trenches, you'll notice that they are a little bit deeper. German trenches tended to be more well-developed than the Allied trenches. They were digging in and had no intentions of leaving. Again, here is our observation post. Actually, let's just duck down in here and see what it looked like from the perspective of the Germans here. Oh my gosh, this is a little hole. Oh, look out. Oh gosh, dang it. Bumped my dang head. Oh, Man, this is tiny. All right. Oh, gosh, I just hit my head again. Okay, so anyway, here we are in this tiny little hole. I don't know if it was worth cracking my head twice to see it, but this is the view that a German soldier would have had, again, looking laterally down the line into no man's land. All right, I'm going to back out of here and we'll continue down the German trenches. All right, continuing to wind our way through these trenches here. All right, and here is one of the outpost positions for the Germans. Now let's get up here and take a look at this. Now this would have been a very bad idea if we would have been a German here in 1917. But if you look across the way there, well, those are the two steel plates that we were looking at just a moment ago on the Canadian side. Look at how close that is. I can't even imagine being one of these soldiers in this spot in 1917. I mean, we're close enough to have guys throwing grenades at each other. Now, the risk of getting hit by shell fire here, it's, present, but maybe not as much of a risk because there was the risk of, rounds landing short and hitting your own guys. Here, men would have been, throwing grenades at each other. You also would have had like little trench mortars that could do damage. Yeah, this is wild. Okay, moving up the German communication trench now. One thing that I have noticed is that, man, these trenches were a lot more elaborate than what we saw on the other side. Here you see an area it's kind of carved out, maybe for holding ammunition or some other kind of supply. Oh, yeah, looky here. So I mentioned trench mortars just a moment ago. Well, here's a trench mortar here kind of back from those forward trenches. So again, these were used here on the very front line where it might be too risky to call in artillery fire. And this trench mortar does not look serviceable anymore. It looks like it has a little bit of damage to it. Man, that is cool as heck. Okay, making our way out of the trenches now. One quick thing that I do want to mention. Wow, this is really amazing. All these craters and everything. Anyway, one thing that I do want to mention, we're focusing on the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which kicks off on April 9th. Just because the main battle kicked off on April 9th didn't mean that there was nothing going on prior to that. There were a lot of what was called trench raids that were occurring, where you would send parties of men out to either try and take out a machine gun or a trench mortar or to try and capture the enemy. So this was a very, very active front right here that was very dangerous. All right, so anyway, guys from the 3rd Infantry Division would have been moving up right through this spot where I am right now after they cleared these trenches. Would have been kind of a chaotic, confused mess. You read accounts of the men who were here, and they'll talk about how in many cases it would just take one guy who would kind of pull everyone together and lead by example and charge up through these places to overtake these lines and advance the troops forward. Yeah, this is something else. All right, we're going to go ahead and move over to the 4th Infantry Division sector now. I've now moved over to the far left flank of the Canadian assault. The 4th Canadian Infantry Division was going to be tasked with what was probably the toughest part of Vimy Ridge, a feature known as Hill 145. It's the highest point on the ridge and was going to be heavily defended. So you can imagine on April 9th, guys moving through here, going amongst all of the shell craters and things like that, advancing to the top under withering fire. As we are walking up here along what appears to be an old communication trench, you may have noticed these trees in the background and noted that they don't exactly look like French trees. They look more like some of the trees that you would find in Canada. Well, there's a reason for that. These are Canadian trees. When the French government turned this land over to the Canadians after the war in order to form this memorial and to preserve the battlefield, well, one of the things that they did was they brought Canadian trees over here and planted them to create this forest. And it's said that there were originally around 11,000 trees planted to represent the 11,000 missing among the Canadian Corps in World War I. So yeah, when you're walking here among the forest, these trees are also a monument to those who fought and died here. I would be remiss if I came all the way to Vimy Ridge and didn't take just one quick moment to acknowledge the Vimy sheep. Most of the battlefield here on Vimy Ridge you can't access because it's an uncleared battlefield. So they say that there's a risk from unexploded ordnance here on the battlefield. So anyway, in order to keep the grass down, well, they send the sheep out into the dangerous areas and they keep it mowed down. I've got a feeling that this is going to be some people's favorite part of the entire video. All right, we have nearly made it to the top of Hill 145 here. And by mid-afternoon on April 9th, the 4th Infantry Division had been cut to ribbons getting up to this point. There's another terrain feature off to my left here that was called the Pimple, which was another piece of high ground that was hitting them in the flank as well. There was another group from the 4th Infantry that was going to be assaulting that position. So again, mid-afternoon, David Watson, the commanding general of the 4th Infantry Division, decided to throw an unlikely group into the fray here to try and make the final push here on Hill 145. It was a group called the 85th Highlanders from Nova Scotia. We're continuing our walk over Hill 145 here, and as you can see, we've got the remains of a German bunker that was up here. Now, I mentioned the 85th Highlanders. This was, again, kind of an unlikely group to be thrown into the mix here. The 85th Highlanders, they had really just been used as a work party up to this point and hadn't even been issued kilts yet. So some of their comrades in other units, teased them and called them the Trousered Highlanders. But anyway, they get thrown into the fight here on April 9th. Charge to the top of this hill, and they just fight like demons against the German defenders. And they end up securing the western part of this hill by the evening. But there was still going to be another 3 days of fighting to fully secure Hill 145. April 9th would prove to be the bloodiest day of the war for the Canadians. After it was all said and done, here at Vimy Ridge, the Canadians had lost 3,500 killed and over 7,000 wounded. Just a devastating loss. But for many, this was considered to be Canada's finest hour, which is why this site was selected as the place where they would build their memorial after the war. Before us is the Canadian Memorial here at Vimy Ridge. When people come to Vimy Ridge on the approach from the western side, they think that they are looking at the front of the memorial. They're actually looking at the back. This is the front, which faces the Douai Plain behind me. This monument was designed by Walter Allwood, and he said that the inspiration for the monument came to him in a dream. There was a big competition that was held in the early 1920s, and his work was selected to be the design for the monument. It took 11 years, but it was eventually completed on July 26th of 1936. If you look at the design, there's all kinds of symbolism that is built into this monument. It rests on 15,000 tons of concrete, has 6,000 tons of limestone that was brought in from Croatia to build it. And the two towers that you see represent Canada and France. These are two nations who were united in war and united by a common goal. There are 20 figures on the monument. The one at the very top represents peace, and then there are others that represent justice and truth and gallantry and sympathy and knowledge. This is one of the most beautiful and striking monuments that I've ever seen. I've moved up a little bit closer to show what is the largest sculpture on this monument. This is called Canada Bereft, and you can see it's carved from a 30-ton block to represent a young mother who is grieving the loss of her son, which also represents, Canada as a young nation in grief for their losses. And when you cast your gaze down from where she stands, well, you can see that she is over the tomb of a soldier, and it's draped in laurels and has a helmet and a sword on top. Yeah, that is powerful. From up here on top of the memorial, man, you can really get a commanding view of the Douai Plain beyond and see why the capture of this ridge was so important. And here etched in stone it says, the Canadian Corps on the 9th of April 1917, with our divisions in line on a front of 4 miles, attacked and captured this ridge. Now, even though Vimy Ridge is widely considered to be Canada's finest hour, they also use this part of the monument to honor the other battles that the Canadians were a part of. So up there, I see Ypres, St. Julien, St. Eloi, Thiepval, Vimy, Arras, Polygon Wood. Okay, so all of the battles that the Canadians were a part of are etched in stone here on this part of the monument. I've now moved around to the back of the memorial, and there are more sculptures back here. So on this part of the memorial, which again a lot of people think is the front because this is the direction that you approach from, on our left we have a grieving woman, and on our right a grieving man, symbolizing how the war affected everybody in some way. There are 11,285 Canadians who died in World War I who have no known grave. They are among the missing. So another element that was built into this memorial was a wall that has the names of all of Canada's missing soldiers. Among all of these names on the wall of the missing, there was one in particular that I wanted to find, and it's this one here, that of A. Taylor. Taylor was in the 28th Canadian Infantry Regiment and died on August the 27th of 1918. And the reason that I wanted to find his name is that with me today I brought his military medals. The medal on the right is a British War Medal. This was awarded to soldiers who fought in World War I. And then the medal on the left is a World War I Victory Medal. You notice on the ribbon it's rainbow colored, so the different colors represent the different nations, and also the rainbow represents the peace after the storm. And here you have winged victory here. And then on the back of these medals, like here on this one on the right with the British military medal, you see this figure on a horse trampling this eagle underfoot with a skull and crossbones representing the Allied victory over Germany and Austria-Hungary. And on the sides of these medals are engraved the name and service number of A. Taylor. All right, well, that was just a little bit from right here on Vimy Ridge. This is such an amazing place, and I'm so glad that I was able to come here. I've been wanting to come here for a long time now, and one of the things that I've really been encouraged with as I've walked the ground is seeing all of the kids and all of the school groups that are being brought to this place. I was also glad that we could bring the medals of A. Taylor here and remember his service and sacrifice as well. But there's more to Vimy Ridge than the memorial and Hill 145. There was fighting that took place all along this ridge. So in the next couple of episodes, we're going to go and visit a few of the places that don't get as much attention as what this one does.